Of course, there's racism as well, but there's PC at least, you know, politically correctness, and also like there are legal impediments for such spread of discourse, and so you can't say these possibly. But in France, it was like so easy, and he just like so comfortably said it, and he so comfortably, you know, became an obstacle for me to continue living in France. And then I rented a place through a Turkish landlord. I mean, not in a ghetto necessarily, but then, so that was, I was like, kind of like forced to do that culturally connected deal, although I had no intentions to do so. Anyhow, that happens, and I don't know the other places in Europe to be able to judge or to be able to make comparisons, but then I can make comparisons with the States.
But I'm just so sorry that I completely agree with you, and I don't want to put a blame on a particular group or particular state, but how you behave is actually shaped. How the society and how the public opinion is shaped is very important. It is shaped by advertisements, it is shaped by the news, it is shaped by the TV channels, it is also shaped by hearings from other people, and also education. How do you educate? How do you know, how your teacher told you about Turkey is really important, isn't it? Yeah. For example, I have heard that in Greece, I haven't seen it, so it's not from the first person point of view, but I have heard it. They have bad pictures about Turkey. For example, Turkey's flag under Greece soldiers or something like that. So how do you expect a child who sees this to behave like? You know, for example, if you see an advertisement or a news on the newspaper that a Turkey guy grabbed or hitchhiked or I don't know what else, or killed or murdered a person, how do you know, it's very natural to you to have prejudices about Turkish people, actually. I just one anecdote. I have a friend from Slovakia, and she said she daily reads 2 newspapers, and one of them, not necessarily about immigrants, but one of them never gives good things about Turkish people or the immigrants or Filipinos or other peoples in the country. And the other one also gives place to Turkish successfulness, let me say. For example, a Turkish entrepreneur have something established or have achieved something or something like that. So if you see something like that, for example, a Turkish guy have made something good for your government, you may think that, oh, Turkish can do something. Turkish people maybe not that bad. You know, it's the way you teach public.
Yeah, also, like, I don't know how many of you are aware, we had a little bit about it at our course here. We had about the immigrants who came from Turkey to Europe. Like, they usually didn't come from Istanbul. Like, they usually came from some of the poorer parts of Turkey. Yes. And like, these people, nowadays in Denmark, at least what we heard, is that they're much more conservative than most people are here. Yeah. And what you can remember is that people in Denmark or in Germany, like, most of their experiences with Turks and how they look at Turks is going to be very influenced by these people being very, very conservative. And at least, and this is my personal experience with Turks I've talked to, who's been to Denmark, including the guy's name right there. I can't remember what his name was, but his name was. He's talking about how she was a little bit shocked about how Turks in Denmark behaved. Like, he's talking about giving some examples about situations where, you know, some Turks in Denmark being very conservative and being. And this is what people in Europe mainly see as Turks. So, of course, and then, you know, when they compare them with all the other immigrants, you know, they can see that bigger difference between Palestinians or Turks or whatever they come from. And so basically, you know, they don't really distinguish. So they see, well, why are Turks different than the other ones? You know?
The thing is, I'm the one speaking. Well, I'm so sorry. If you wanna say something, then you know, say it. But they have migrated from Turkey to Europe in the 1970s. And from then on, maybe before, I don't know, from then on they have no connection to Turkey again. They never came back, maybe. They have all their families with grandmas, grandfathers, fathers, dads, everything. They have carried all their property to there. And from then on, they have no connection to Turkey. So what they know about Turkey is 70s Turkey, not 2010. We have really made great achievement from then on. Good or bad, we have made achievement.
Well, it's not, they actually, we've been talking to a lot of Turks living in Aarhus, or Danish Turks, and they actually do go back to Turkey, like the place where they come from, twice a year. Of course, they don't live here, so they don't have the everyday experience of actually living in Turkey, and still they also mainly go back to the place they come from. And actually, a lot of the Turkish Danes in Aarhus come from Sivas. Yeah, almost all of them actually, like 80% or something. So they also have like a Sivas community, like in Aarhus. So they, yeah. I may pronounce it wrong.
No, okay. No, I just said Sivas. Kind of.
But also about the discourse in Denmark, I also think that we have a really big problem with, of course, as in many other European countries, with this rightist, nationalist discourse that is really penetrating the media, and you know, politics is all about little cases about. Actually, there was a case, for example, where the most nationalist party in Denmark really got a big story out of, well, saying basically that some Danish people had experienced not being cake and coffee for them in the waiting rooms in the hospitals, and it was because all the immigrants came and ate it all. And, stories like this, they really still a lot of it's terrible, but it's true.
We tend to do that.
And you know, people talk about it for 2 weeks. So it's really,
and everybody said the pot of cakes.
Yeah, kind of funny. People started, you know, making a joke.
No, but I think identity is very important here. Yeah. I mean, understanding identity not as something fixed. I mean, okay, like you say, yes, this is a historical, fact. Yani, Turkish people that migrated in the first place, the first wave, it was from mostly eastern parts or more underdeveloped parts of Turkey. This is true, but I mean, this does not necessarily. It does not necessarily equate to these people being conservative or religious just because of that. I mean, you might state that. I mean, a proper way to put it might be that yes, they come from traditional families and traditional backgrounds, but what's important is not where they come from. I think what's important is the moment of encountering the other. I think. I mean, how that contact has been formed. I mean, their first experiences in Europe. I think that's also very influential in constituting their ideologies, their religious or political stances today, because most research about Turkish migrants in Europe, it is stated that these people are very nationalistic and yes, conservative, but what's important is more than being conservative is them being nationalistic, and this is because they want to hold to their so-called roots, whatever that might signify for them. I mean, and encountering the other, living with the other, and being, trying to be dominated or assimilated into that culture, they're probably holding on to that very strongly. Whether this is something positive or negative, it depends on where you are.
But you know, actually, the assimilation thing is also interesting because, because of all this xenophobia and you know that is in Denmark and the really bad debate about immigrants in general. I also think this, you know, for example, us talking about ghettos, you know, that's a really, really bad word because it has so many negative connotations to it. But it's become, you know, like a natural word to use for these places where, or parts of cities where there lives a lot of immigrants. And, you know, also that is like kind of a stigmatization that also makes people come together and, you know, live in the same place because they feel more at home when they live in a place where they can, you know, where they don't feel like they're as much stigmatized as they probably sometimes are if they live in like a normal Danish neighborhood. Well, the assimilation thing is also, you know, a recent example is that we just recently got a new Minister of Integration, and the first thing he goes out and say in the media was that, well, okay, the story behind it is that he's a guy who always says like really controversial stuff, so it's not that surprising, but it's still, you know, it still says a lot about the situation in Denmark, I think. The first thing he said was, well, I don't want to talk integration, I don't believe in integration, I want to talk assimilation. That's also, you know, how could that ever be a good thing, you know? What is it you want to achieve with the, well, it's definitely not integration, so, and what does integration actually mean in you know, this party's eyes? It's really unclear. But,
yeah, I also think that the problems we have with immigration are not that big as we think, because like, especially in Denmark, the people talk about it all the time, and then you look at the numbers and it's really not that many immigrants anyways. And in Germany, as we talk about it all the time as well, and I think it's such a, most, like all the immigrants I know are exactly like me. So I always wonder who these different people are that they talk about. And I'm sure that there are neighborhoods in which there are more problems, but I think it's more like a social problem, and we give it a little too much attention. I think that's a very important point. I mean, this new rise in identity politics might be actually concealing a class-based, the more traditional understanding of a class-based problems in Turkey as well. I mean, and in Europe and in Turkey as well.
But don't you think that the stigmatization also is a part of the work market? I think that's a problem as well. That's also, you know, a part of the social problem that, well, it is a lot harder to get a job if you have an immigrant background in Denmark than if you don't. It's not something that's, you know, painted on the door when you go into an interview, but it is pretty. I think it's pretty obvious sometimes, and yeah, a big problem maybe.
Do we have the same thing for Kurdish people in Turkey?
Of course, yeah, and that's why I said the identity. But I mean, it's not only, yes, the Kurdish-Turkish divide is very prominent when it comes to identity issues, but also the Islamic versus secular divide is also very important. But I mean, there's a cross-cutting socioeconomic problems as well. I mean, cross-cutting these identity issues. Yeah. So I mean, this is very pertinent to Turkey as well.
Well, if we continue along the minority, specifically the Kurdish minority thing, the Kurdish minority is not recognized in Turkey.
That's official minority.
Yeah. And yet, you know, the EU constantly notes the fact that for example, the Kurdish